Welcome. I'm going to be giving you a very basic outline of Jungian dream work and how you might make use of Jung's four-part schema of dream interpretation to interpret some of your dreams. Jung, in his seminars on children's dreams, identified four different sequences in a dream. The first he called the locale, which represents the place, the time, and the dramatis personae in the dream. By that he meant who are the persons in the dream or the figures. It could be a human, animal, reptile figures, could be animate or inanimate objects, but what are the active figures in the dream? The personae. Two is the exposition. What's the illustration of the problem in the dream? There's some kind of problem being illustrated. The third he called Peripateia. Now this is the illustration of a transformation which can involve the catastrophe of some kind. It makes room for that in the third sequence. The fourth is called the Lysis, and that's the result of the dream. What is the end of the dream? It comes to some kind of conclusion or a meaningful closure. It can compensate some kind of illustration of the action. There's some kind of action being illustrated at the end, and that can be either finished or unfinished. Now, I've spoken before about Jung's dream from 1909 in my book on William James and C.G. Jung, Doorways to the Self, that gave him his hypothesis of the collective unconscious and what he called archetypes. Now, before that, Jung had studied schizophrenia and was an expert in the subject of working with very disturbed patient fantasies and dream material, and he really became internationally famous for the theory of complexes, even before he came to America with Sigmund Freud and Sandor Ferenczi and Ernest Jones, and where he met William James at Clark University. Jung presented a child case at Clark, and that turned out to be his 4-year-old daughter, little Anna, as he called her. Now, the children's dreams, this was a seminar he gave between 1936 and 1940. There were 4 of them, 4 consecutive years. And in these seminars, Jung asked the participants to see if they could remember the earliest dream from their childhood. And I wonder if, as you're listening to this video, you might also want to see if a memory surfaces of some kind of dream image that spoke to you as a child. For Jung, it was at the age of 3. For some of you, it might be later, 5, 7, 9, into latency or adolescence. See what emerges as you're listening to this. Oftentimes these dreams contain what he called a future destiny. See, dreams have a purpose. They have a telos, a teleology. They point towards a goal in the future. And that's one aspect of the dream. They can be what he called prospective dreams, or there are also dreams that are compensatory. They compensate the conscious attitude in order to create balance between the ego and the complexes and the self. So I'm not going to talk about Jung's dream in this video. I've talked about it before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example of a dream I had in preparation for a course I'll be teaching on Jungian dream work. And that will also include a practical example of how these four schema of dream interpretation can be looked at. Now, it's important to recognize that in addition to what Freud called wish fulfillments in dreams, there are also natural outcroppings that occur from a center of meaning. And one way to illustrate this is by drawing a circle and have 8 arrows in a geometrical form radiating outward from a very center core of meaning, that the dream is dreamt by the self, it's created by the self. The self, you could say, is the orchestrator of the dream and is presenting the dream in a natural way to the conscious mind of the dreamer in order to try and restore or create some kind of balance. Because the psyche is often trying to find a sense of harmony between itself and the environment, the self and society. And so dreams will then be helpful and useful in creating what Jung called a condition of relative wholeness or completeness. Now, Freud had talked about there being a dream censor in the interpretation of dreams in 1900 when he published The Interpretation of Dreams. Jung had read The Interpretation of Dreams, and he also observed that there were no reasons for the psyche to produce some kind of disguise, to hide something from the dreamer. So he really looked at the dream as a natural phenomenon, and that's the way we Jungian analysts and psychotherapists tend to look at dreams, as natural occurrences. Now, one of the things that I want to try and make very clear is that dreams often have something to do with the way in which we're living our life in the outer world. There may be some part of the self, whether it's the material self, the body self, the social self, or the spiritual self. If any of those selves are out of balance within ourselves, then the dream comes to restore some kind of integrity between the ego and the self. There's an axis between ego and self, and the dreams are the line of communication between the conscious and the unconscious. Now, as I was preparing for this class on Jungian dream work, I was talking in the PowerPoint presentation. I was writing out what I was going to say, and I was talking about the process of amplification and how that differs from free association. Free association is something Jung experimented with in dream work after he read Freud's book on dreams. And what he found is that that free association can be very useful in exploring complexes, what he called complexes. But free association can often become a circling around complexes. And so if the aim of the dream was not necessarily to focus on specific complexes in the psyche, then another method was useful and helpful. And he called that amplification. To amplify means to broaden an understanding around a particular image or a series of images. And this can be illustrated through a kind of circling around a core or a nucleus of meaning that the dream is presenting with. In order to uncover that meaning, sometimes it's helpful to begin to spiral around an image towards a center, as if you're illustrating a movement like in a labyrinth towards a center. Right at that point where I was completing that part of my presentation, I thought I was done with my presentation, and I had a dream. And in the dream, I found myself in a seminar room, and it was a course I was giving on Jungian dream work. There was a particularly rational type of woman in midlife, and she was taking notes, and there was an audience, although what stood out most was this female who was asking a lot of questions about this process of circumambulation, or spiraling around a center or nucleus of meaning. So because she was so interested intellectually in understanding this on a theoretical basis, I myself was not in the state of mind to be able to do that in a real linear way, because I was more in a meditative state. I was rather introverted and focusing inward on the background of my talk. And what I did was I took out a piece of art paper. It was a large a block of white paper, and I drew a spiral, and I showed the spiral to her. And she looked at it, and I told her that as I made eyes with her, I do not want to talk about how to circumambulate around dream images. I want to take you with me into the spiral. And if you will let me, if you will follow me, I can show you and illustrate to you how we do this, how Jungians practice the method of circumambulation. She looked curious at that point and was very interested. And at the end of the dream, I told her that I wanted to get her out of her head. And that's how the dream ended. There was some surprise, I think, in her face. And I felt pleased and content that I had conveyed something to her about the process. of circumambulation. Now, let's just go down the list again of those four schema of dream interpretation. The locale of the dream was in a modern seminar room. The place was now contemporary time. The dramatis personae were myself, the dream ego, and a rational type woman, and an audience in the background. And she was taking notes, as I said. The exposition was the illustration of the problem. The problem was that she was not understanding on a thinking level what is meant by spiraling around a center of meaning. So the illustration of the transformation that took place, stage 3, the Peripateia, was that I was able to illustrate to her on the art paper a spiral. And it didn't end in a catastrophe. It ended in a kind of a insight, an understanding that there are two types of thinking. The first was the type she was engaged in, which was directed thinking, what Jung called directed thinking. And the second was what he called a fantasy thinking, which is more where I was, that's what I was in, was that state of mind, which is closer to the unconscious, to the twilight state, closer to the image itself. So the Lysis, the end, number 4 of the dream, the result of the dream, or the meaningful closure, was that it illustrated some action on my part to convey to her in a nonverbal way how to actually vision this method. So it resulted in a kind of change in both of us. One was that I felt no longer so compelled, the dream ego did, to remain in my directed thinking in an attempt to clarify everything intellectually, whereas she gained some kind of a nonverbal appreciation for this concept through the illustration on the paper, and her then having a choice at the end to engage with me, follow me into the spiral. Now, in a sense, this is analogous to the sand paintings of the Navajo, where the medicine man will actually have the patient who has some kind of illness sit on the sand painting itself. And sometimes these sand paintings are of beautiful spirals I've seen in some of the, in the Museum of Anthropology. I've seen a number of these gorgeous sand paintings with the spiral. And of course, that's a very ancient symbol. We find it on petroglyphs and rock carvings. It's an ancient symbol. Of course, it corresponds to spiral galaxies and universal phenomenon in the cosmos. Now, I hope that brief illustration of circumambulation has helped you understand how, by focusing on an image and keeping one's mind on an image, something can emerge, a new sense of understanding, a new realization, a new sense of having uncovered something that was not there previously in the understanding. So I hope this video has helped you understand a few points about Jungian dream work, and that you experiment with interpreting your own dreams and see what they can bring to you in terms of your own life and understanding of your own destiny, and where your destination is, where you're heading, because that's one of the main areas of dream research that I've focused on in my own life for over 40 years now, and these are what I call vocational dreams. So you can check out my other videos on vocational dreams and also on synchronicity if you'd like, and thank you for watching.